Welcome everybody to this AWS Generative AI Solution Spotlight. I'm Will Garcia, Solutions Architect at AWS. I work with Plerion, a security-focused technology partner who's building on AWS native security and AI services. So today you'll hear about Plerion. Where do we focus on the risks that matter together to achieve velocity, but with vigilance? Joining me is also Daniel Roth, Technical GTM Lead at Plerion. Thanks, Daniel, so much for coming around and joining us. So to get us started, I will cover quickly some of the security principles with a couple of examples on AI because there's a lot of the developments in that space in 2026. We will go into what does that mean in Plerion as well, how Plerion leverages AWS foundations to provide security tooling, security, best security practices that you can, get started with really quickly. Daniel will run us through a quick demo as well with an example of mitigation, so that should be pretty good. We will leave some time at the end for Q&As as well and next steps. So at this point, you probably, most of you know that, AWS has always been really focused into security as top number one priority for us. Last year, we blocked over 300 million malicious encryption attempts targeting customers' data on S3, for example. Our managed threat protection service, GuardDuty, Amazon GuardDuty, is analyzing tens of billions of security events every day across networking services, application services, and so on. And then this year, we've released a lot of major features within the security portfolio as well for incident response, for automated penetration testing, and integrations with partner security solutions like Plerion as well. Now, what drives customers into that journey of adopting cloud beyond the innovation we provide with more than 200 plus services? It's, of course, guarantees around security. Our approach to it is defense in depth with zero trust principles. This isn't really a single solution. It's a layered approach across the infrastructure and application stack, from identity to networking to application protection and cloud protection. What really matters the most here in this context is going to be how do we correlate security events? How do we identify root causes quickly as well to resolve security incidents? And how do we actually tackle that before or as it happens, right? So that real-time aspect is really important, and the context across the stack is also super, super important. So what changes here, if we just take an example with AI, if you look at, an agentic implementation, this is a simplified version of it with a few agents communicating with each other on behalf of a user using tools like the MCP standard tool to access external systems, APIs, or data stores, for example. In this context, the agents are going to be taking decisions autonomously. So there's a big value there, but it also means that you cannot really predict the action path at design time in this type of architectures. So we need to think of it like differently. We need to think about also what the agent itself can achieve. They can be executing code, and they are going to be manipulating data. So these two cannot be separate anymore. And all of that really compounds, right? Like an agent could be calling a tool, that tool could be calling a system you don't have control over, for example. So we've published guidance. We will talk in a moment about some of what we do in this space. But really, it's all about understanding that AI workloads also introduce now new AI threats, and we are really investing in that space at AWS. We were, in fact, the first cloud provider compliant with ISO 42001 as an example of that. At the same time, there's a massive acceleration. If you look at some of the AWS customers leveraging AI tools to build and deploy in AWS, for example, Kiro, which is a development environment for being, assisted with AI to build quality applications with AI. There's a massive acceleration. So that upside is great. Now, what's the downside is really the attack surface, as I was talking about before. So we've partnered with Plerion since 2023, which is when Plerion joined the AWS Partner Network. Plerion is an Australian cloud security company. In case you didn't know, the first ISV in ANZ who achieved the AWS security competency. They've expanded quite rapidly since then internationally to other countries outside of the APAC region. And they started to use Amazon Bedrock very early on to solve some of the problems we constantly hear about, like, for example, tool sprawl across security stacks, alerting fatigue, but also more importantly, I think manual triage per incident. So they really help you compress the time to resolve incidents as they happen. So this answer from Plerion is outcome-based, if you like, solution across a range of different things. Like you can see here, Plerion can help you monitor your AWS estate 24/7 for sure, and they can also essentially do that in a way that is autonomous. For example, Plerion, the platform, can schedule its own tasks, follow-ups on its own remediations, check days later if that remediation has been completely resolved, if patches have been applied as well along the way. It's going to use under the hood some of the Bedrock models available, for example, Claude Sonnet, or Amazon Foundation models like Nova Pro, Nova Lite. Why? Because these models are able to do complex reasoning on all this data from AWS security services that Plerion integrates with, and also these other external systems like code bases, ticketing systems that Plerion also integrates with. For example, Nova here is able to handle the large volume of events happening typically in a customer environment at very low cost. So there are benefits there in using some of these Bedrock features at the back. I didn't really talk about what Bedrock is, but really quickly, the service started as a single unified API endpoint, giving you access to more than 100 plus LLMs at the back end. We partnered with leading model providers. I talked about Claude from Anthropic. I talked about Nova, but there are other ones like Llama, Mistral, and other ones. But then that service evolved really quickly into providing very advanced features. Briefly mentioned before the cost. So, for example, with model distillation, you can get to 75% cheaper cost when running Bedrock as an LM backend. And this is actually super important for always-on security agents like what Pleri provides to you today. There is a lot of more new features coming up, especially in the agent core side of the fence, which is how you're going to build and deploy agents really quickly. You can use all the capabilities you see there. Like, for example, the runtime is a very important one to run agents in a completely isolated environment in micro VMs, long-term and short-term memory, and also integration to identity providers, which we briefly touched on before. Some of these agents needing to, for example, hack on behalf of users, or talk to each other. So you need to manage the authentication and authorization flows there along the way. And then for data sovereignty, Bedrock is available in region or in country with inference profiles in region or in country. For example, available in Australia, in Singapore, India, and of course the United States. What that means is really that that data won't leave AWS network boundaries. and we won't actually be able to even do anything about it. We don't share the input and outputs of these prompts to any model providers as well, which is a really key aspect to that security. Um, Bedrock comes with built-in defaults as well around that. For example, encryption in transit with TLS 1.2. You as a user of Bedrock and Bedrock Agent Core, you can implement things like Bedrock guardrails for filtering input and outputs to models. So this is really helpful, for example, for toxicity filtering, PII filtering, and masking. Some of these use cases around ensuring that the data that doesn't even reach the LLM to start with, if there are some rules you want to apply to that. And then Plerion really leverages all these capabilities to give you the best security outcomes possible, doing that on a daily and hourly basis. And that's really where customers get a lot of benefits, because Plerion and Pleri is extending your team, acting as a new teammate that's able to really support you with these best practices, and more importantly, help you to resolve them, understand them as quickly as possible by cutting the noise as well, so you can really focus on the risks that matter the most. On that front, I will say that this is probably the key benefit of Plerion stack. The high risk items is where you want to be looking into. They are not easy to pick up with traditional security tools, and that's really where Plerion comes to help you build that context continuously. So perhaps here, Daniel, it would be good to see that in action with that example you have in mind, I think. Thanks, Daniel. Over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. My name's Dan. I'm a solution architect and the technical go-to-market lead for Plerion. And so I wanted to jump in and start off with Plerion and AWS's relationship and so the better together story here. So as we'll jump into, Plerion's a cloud security company based in Australia and in the US. And we do a ton of work with the AWS teams. And now our partnership has many different facets. We have a whole heap of native integrations to get the most out of many of the AWS native security tooling, GuardDuty, Macie, etc. We're also a audited and certified AWS security competency ISV. And we have a deep co-sell relationship. So we do a lot of joint go-to-market and security assessments across our joint customers, ultimately driving that shared goal and customer outcome of providing more secure cloud environments for the teams working across AWS footprint. Cool. So to give you a bit of an overview of Plerion, as I mentioned, we were founded and headquartered in Sydney, Australia. We've got about 120 customers across the APAC and US region. We were founded in 2023, and was actually the second company from the same set of founders. So back sort of 2016 through to 2019, we were early movers in the CSPM market, just looking at the posture component. Built a company called Cloud Conformity that ended up exiting to Trend Micro and became their cloud security platform. And Plerion was really round two. Right? How can we continue to evolve that capability? And that's the Plerion platform. As I mentioned, we're a security competency partner, one of the AWS Global Startup RSV Accelerate program members. And really in the last 18 months, a lot of our development work has really gone into how do we turn the security data that's in cloud security platforms like Plerion into actual outcomes. That's where Pleri comes in. So bringing that code to cloud security visibility, but actually turning it not just from alerts, but to full action, allowing engineers and security teams to move much faster. And Pleri works where you work. So as a more holistic overview on Plerion, there's really three sort of key pillars. So we've got the core Plerion cloud security platform. That's looking at all your misconfigurations, looking at vulnerabilities in the cloud environment across both dependencies and operating systems, mapping that to key compliance frameworks, providing in-depth security for the AWS AI stack, so Bedrock, SageMaker, etc. We've got a whole heap of code security capabilities, so plugging into your Git repos, shifting left and ensuring misconfigurations and risks aren't introduced. And then finally, Pleri, which is embedded across all of these capabilities. Again, really turning that cloud security data into outcomes. So whether that's doing investigations of vulnerabilities, risk assessments of remediation paths, creating full PRs, doing tracking and reporting, there's a whole heap of use cases. So without further ado, we'll jump straight into a bit of a solution demo and scene setting. Excellent. Well, conscious we don't have a whole heap of time, but I just, as a starting point, wanted to set the scene for where we see cloud security going. If you think back to the first sort of wave of cloud security tooling, CSPM style tools, great for visibility, but also ultimately very stack rules heavy and led to a lot of alert fatigue and a lot more investigation. Now, the CNAP era, that sort of second chapter of cloud security, winners like Orca, Wiz, Lacework in this space, brought in more context, did more correlation, but ultimately still relied on a heavy amount of human investigation, knowledge, skill, capability, and time. And then the third chapter is this really outcomes-driven era, right? Where we want to leverage that AI execution layer to actually get the work done and provide better security outcomes for you and the team. So how does that fit into Plerion, right? And so at the core, Plerion has a really strong base CNAP offering, covering you from a misconfiguration, vulnerability perspective, plugging into your your Git repos and looking at the code security, providing security across the AI stack. But ultimately, where we see this major step change is in embedding Plerion, so our AI security engineer, to really come in and do the heavy lifting, do the investigation, do that level 1 triage, go end to end from investigation or identification, investigation, prioritization, all the way through to remediation and actually creating the fix. And so what does that look like? Well, as I mentioned, we've got a really strong core CNAP offering that I won't spend a whole lot of time on, but all your findings, vulnerabilities, all mapped against key compliance frameworks. But ultimately, to cut through the noise there, look at what are the top 1% of those correlated findings. So things like top risks. Maybe you have hundreds or thousands of S3 buckets, hundreds of them are publicly exposed, but we want to go and find just the subset that are holding data that shouldn't be publicly accessible. The way we go about doing that is a combination of the inside out checks, so looking at the configuration, but also going and fact checking from the outside in and say, can we access this? If we can access it, understanding what's in the bucket, the level of sensitivity. We also do this for things like attack paths, right? Where is there that combination of that toxic combination of publicly exposed machines that are vulnerable and have access to resources and maybe an overly permissive role or hard-coded secrets like a GitHub, GitLab key, Stripe keys, AWS access keys, that sort of thing. We'll also do that into the code repo, as I mentioned. So, not only looking at once things get into the runtime, but stopping them from getting there. Now, it's all well and good, and it's probably similar to tools you've seen in the past. Like I said, the real step change for us has been Plerion. And so we'll dive into Plerion, although we don't have heaps of time to go into all the use cases. But really, we want to focus on how can we give your team's time back to do the stuff that actually moves the needle, right? And so if we look at like our sort of return on investment dashboards across current customers, this is the type of things we see and things we'll jump into. When there's findings for vulnerabilities, running in-depth exploitability triage autonomously so that when your teams retrieve an alert, it's highly classified with what the issue is, why it's important, whether or not it's actually vulnerable in the context of your environment, and the next steps to remediate. Again, we go into the remediation workflows, and we can always provide steps there for getting issues resolved. And if I just dive that one step deeper into the vulnerability, that vulnerability example, I think it's a great example of where Plerion can really be a time saver, right? I mean, you'll be no stranger to these types of dashboards, hundreds or tens of thousands of vulnerabilities across an environment. And we can slice and dice this in many different ways. But what I want to go and look at is, say, for a particular vulnerability, let's analyze the exploitability in this environment. I'll jump to one that's already been created for us. Is Plerion goes and pulls out from the MVD records the proof of concept code, how it's actually used in your application code, whether or not this vulnerability is truly exploitable in the context. Now from here, we can go and say like create Jira ticket. That's going to go through and provide a highly contextualized Jira ticket with all the details in here. Now, what gets really cool is Plerion isn't just limited to the environment, the Plerion environment, right? It's tool agnostic. So we can pop Plerion open here and say I'm an engineer receiving this ticket. Sure, it's not exploitable, but I want to say, hey, Plerion, even though this isn't exploitable, what other vulnerabilities would I clear by hardening this AMI image? So Pleri's come back, provided that information. We go one step further and say, add this to the Jira ticket summarized. And just like that, Pleri's gone, added all that information around the other tickets, additional vulnerabilities to the ticket itself. Maybe it's not a CV that already exists. Yesterday, there was a major NPM breach, Axios. And a number of packages were made malicious. Now, I jumped into Plerion and across all the customers said, our leadership are asked to source some news around the Axios package. Provide a risk assessment if we're actually impacted that I can present. Now, what came of that? Plerion whipped up a complete risk assessment for all the details, the threat info for what's occurred, an attack autonomy of how it works, and then details on our exposure. So while we do have Axios in the environment, we don't have the malicious versions. However, it's provided the indicators compromised, the code repos where those packages do exist, and recommendations for next approaches. Now, the final thing I'll add is that while this is all well and good, and I've done this in a pretty ClickOpsy fashion, tasks and automations is really where our power users get the most hours back for their teams. So doing full Kev investigations on a weekly basis or a daily basis as they come through. Anytime there's a new vulnerability, doing that investigation, triage, and remediation. That is ultimately how we give time back to your team so that they can work on the things that matter most, right? And put their skills to work, not spend time, digging through MVD logs or investigating public exposure. Excellent. So I hope it gives you a good feel for the platform, what we're achieving for teams in getting that time back so that they can focus on the most important parts of their job. I want to just take a moment just to dive just a little bit deeper into Plerion and how we built it and what we built it for. So when we set out to build Plerion, we really didn't want to just, create another AI assistant component. We want to build a true teammate that works how your teams work and truly does a lot of the heavy lifting. So just to dive into some of those types of work that Plerion does. So whether it's answering an individual question, right? You want to quickly know what assets across your environment are publicly exposed. Are there any Lambda functions in the environment that are coming up to end of life or end of support? Where are the most risky assets in the environment? She can answer those right away. Moving a little further into what are some of those tasks, right? What are those workflows that would otherwise take quite a bit of time to do that Plerion can simplify? So things like running a comprehensive cloud security assessment, looking at all the individual configurations and findings across the environment, triaging and prioritizing that. listing out code repositories with critical vulnerabilities. And where we've seen teams really get time back is when we start to offload a lot of the repetitive work to Plerion. So things like, on the last Friday of every month, we want to do review all our IAM users across AWS, see if any are inactive, haven't been used, flag any risky access patterns, etc. Or on a daily basis, review new PRs in GitHub for any leaked secrets or vulnerable dependencies, and trigger a workflow to run investigation, remediation, and notification of those issues. Additionally, as we start to understand the outcomes of the business, we want to push a lot of that background work to Plerion. So leveraging the regular scans to say across the environment, let me know if there's any net new risk being introduced. Do that triage, go and look at vulnerabilities, for example, and understand the exploitation potential, and provide me that risk assessment. And be a bit more reactive as well when we see new issues. Say there's a new guard duty finding. We want to go and triage it automatically in the environment and send through the details. Or if there's a new malicious package. Recently, there was a Axios package that came to light. We're immediately across all our customers able to go and do an assessment of their environment. And the first thing they saw when they woke up in the morning is whether or not there was any risk of being affected. Now, when we built Plerion, we deliberately made the decision to go all in on the AWS AI stack. So we used a lot of SageMaker for fine tuning, Bedrock for the runtime capabilities, and a whole heap of the guardrail capabilities. A lot of the models as well. While we use the AWS hosted Anthropic models, we also use a lot of the Nova models, and that ability to hot swap models in depending on the task has become really, really critical to the way she operates. When we made the decision to go with Bedrock and the AWS AI stack, there was a couple key components to that. On top of just being able to choose the right model for the right job, the ability to keep all your data, secured, not sending to another third party, was really, really valuable. The ability to build in safety checks and guardrails was also very important to us. And the set of tools that allowed us to build multiple agents and orchestrate them together became really important. Now, while we do tend to use the AWS stack primarily, the other thing that was appealing was the ability to pull in some open source protocols, things like connecting to different MCP servers. And for a lot of our agent-based workflows, we've leveraged a node-based LangGraph framework for the agentic workflow on top of our Bedrock agents. Bedrock itself has given us a whole heap of observability controls, really clear controls on what data the agents have access to. And again, key customizations around the types of responses it can make. Excellent. So hopefully that gave you a good introduction into Plerion and how Pleri can really give your team back time when doing the heavy lifting on cloud security. One of the things we do a lot of the time with AWS customers is joint cloud security assessments. So we're always more than happy to run one of them, give you a good understanding of where your cloud security posture is today, and any of the key gaps that need to be addressed. Feel free to connect with Perno or have a chat to your AWS account manager around running a cloud security assessment. Finally, Plerion is all in on the AWS marketplace and very transparent on the pricing front as well. Excellent. Thank you very much for joining. Any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.